This is the big thing, that happened with those big Midnight Riders rides. They brought together a lot of really talented, smart people. Making bike riding into a fun evening party adventure in LA was huge. I remember going to my first Midnight Riders ride and not just seeing hipsters on fixies. I saw like burnout hippies and homeless dudes and well-paid lawyers and executives and fashion designers and basically like the literati, the intellectual, people in LA. It's like a weird little cabal of a couple thousand people and a couple hundred people in LA that kind of are writing the newspaper articles and are part of our mainstream intellectual society that are on board with this. They've felt it. They've lived this life for the last couple of years now. And they said, we need to do this. This is where LA needs to go. And that's really pushed it in City Hall. When you can go to a City Hall meeting and all the council people, young staffers, have been on Midnight Rides for the last 2 years, you don't have to sell it. They understand. They want that life. They want that happy life where they can not have to get stuck in traffic all the time. Cars are okay, but they're not the only way to get around. And we want to make the streets more equitably distributed. Mayor Villaraigosa of Los Angeles, who wasn't much of a fan of bikes, really touted himself as the LA's greenest mayor, make the city of LA green, plant a bajillion trees. He wanted to be a big friend of the environmentalists, and he got elected on that platform, making LA green. And it turned out after 3 or 4 years in office, it kind of really didn't live up to much of it. He'd done some efforts down at the ports to have these trucks, be green, and it was a bunch of baloney, it turned out. He went to Copenhagen and came back from that climate conference and did some, people really got him on social media after Copenhagen. Oh, you're a loser. People are dying in the streets on bikes. Do something about it. And then he did this demo. He rode some kid's fixed gear bicycle. A taxi driver pulled in front of him. He fell over and broke his arm. And after that day, he was like Mr. Bike Los Angeles. The LA bike plan was a huge fight that took over like 2.5 years to finally be redone. A lot of advocates fought very long and hard to have the city include the Backbone Bike Network, which was actually created in a series of public workshops done by volunteers over a couple of months to find out what people that ride bikes actually want, which is a backbone in their city bike network. And what it basically consists of is all of the major arterials in LA, Vermont, Wilshire, Olympic, Sepulveda, Pico, Venice, Washington, Figueroa, Broadway, Main, 7th Street, some of these major streets that feed into downtown and into the major hubs of the city, that we want those streets because these are the streets that it turns out, with or without bike facilities, people ride the most. The MTA did a survey in 2002, I think, 2003, their Enhanced Public Outreach Program, where they surveyed cyclists on the street, they surveyed them on the internet, and they found that the place where people ride the most in LA County is on those major streets because that's where everything is. That's where you wash dishes, that's where the dishes you need to wash are because that's where the restaurant is. You have an office job, that's where the office is. That's where we ride, whether or not there's a bike lane or not. The big cost associated with something like the Backbone Bike Network is all in public outreach and bureaucracy, doing all these environmental clearances and studies of car traffic and bike traffic and stuff. So that's the hope. And once we have some nice facilities on those major streets, it depends on where they're done and how it's done, but the hope is that planning for bikes isn't just planning for bikes. It's planning for a more civil society, a more calm street where you can shop and eat and talk and open a new business, a new office, and not have to worry about parking because your employees can ride a bike, so you don't have to pay to lease land. You can open a restaurant without having to worry about all the customers flooding the neighborhood because most people will bike or walk or take the train or bus. And it's about that kind of city. There's so much pressure on the mayor now to be green, to finish and have a legacy. And there's so much pressure on our elected officials to have some legitimate governance at the local level. I mean, here in Northeast LA, the first bike plan didn't have squat for Northeast LA. The bike plan the initial version of it, this whole section of the city, 2 area codes, 90065 and 9042, had basically